Director John Milius created Red Dawn as the first PG-13 film ever released, with the MPAA inventing the rating just weeks before its premiere. Patrick Swayze led an ensemble that became 1980s icons. These are 20 hidden details you completely missed in Red Dawn. Number 20. The MPAA introduced the PG-13 rating in July 1984, and Red Dawn was the first movie officially released with that rating on August 10th, 1984. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins had caused controversy earlier that year with intense PG-rated content that sparked parental concerns. Director Steven Spielberg himself suggested the need for an intermediate rating between PG and R after directing Temple of Doom. MPAA President Jack Valenti agreed to create a category that strongly cautioned parents about material inappropriate for children under 13. The Flamingo Kid actually received the first PG-13 rating, but Red Dawn opened in theaters first. John Milius had already completed filming before the rating, making the designation accidental rather than intentional. Number 19. At release, Red Dawn was considered the most violent film by the Guinness Book of Records and the National Coalition on Television Violence, with 134 acts of violence per hour or 2.23 per minute. The organization counted mostly teenagers killing Soviet invaders and vice versa, more than any movie they had studied. Protesters picketed the MGM/UA building in opposition to the film. Milius said they didn't like that the movie shows violence against Russian and Cuban invaders. The body count includes numerous on-screen deaths throughout the 114-minute runtime. The 2007 DVD special edition includes an on-screen carnage counter in a nod to this controversial distinction that defined its initial reception. Number 18. The invasion by Soviet, Cuban, and Nicaraguan forces mirrors real Cold War anxieties during the Reagan administration when fears of communist expansion in Central America dominated political discourse. The film's opening establishes that the Soviet Union suffers its worst wheat harvest in 55 years. Labor riots erupt in Poland, and Cuba and Nicaragua reached troop strength goals of 500,000. Milius and former Secretary of State Alexander Haig devised a backstory based on Germany's proposed US invasion plans during World War II. Haig introduced Nicaragua into the scenario and suggested that with NATO's collapse, a left-wing Mexican government would participate. The classroom scene outlining Cuban involvement directly echoes Reagan's televised warnings about communist forces operating near American borders. Number 17. Originally titled 10 Soldiers, the script was written by Kevin Reynolds while still a student at USC Film School. The producer read it and thought it had potential to become a tough, taut art picture made on a modest budget. Senior Vice President for Production Peter Bart remembered it as a sharply written anti-war movie, a sort of Lord of the Flies scenario. MGM optioned the script and asked Milius to direct it. He was signed at a fee of $1.25 million plus a gun of his choice, and set about rewriting Reynolds' material. Milius said the original was similar to Lord of the Flies, but his version was about resistance rather than survival breakdown, transforming the story into something more action-oriented. Number 16. Milius described the film as allegorical and rooted in American frontier mythology rather than strict realism, comparing it to stories of pioneer survival and guerrilla resistance throughout history. The director, who also wrote Apocalypse Now and directed Conan the Barbarian, approached Red Dawn as a modern western where teenagers become new frontiersmen defending their homeland. Working with Alexander Haig, he amplified the script's patriotic elements and played down the complexity Reynolds had originally envisioned. The mountain hideout scenes echo classic American western imagery, with teenagers hunting deer and living off the land like frontier settlers. Milius told interviewers the film was about what happens to ordinary people when their world collapses and they must become warriors. Number 15. The teen resistance group takes its name from their high school mascot, establishing immediate emotional connection to the community and identity they're fighting to preserve. This grounds the rebellion in small-town identity before war disrupts everything they know. Production designer Jackson DeGovia incorporated Wolverine imagery throughout the high school scenes, including banners, painted walls, and athletic uniforms that become relics after the invasion. The first shouted Wolverines in the forest marks their psychological transformation from frightened refugees to organized fighters with shared identity. The name also references the Wolverine animal's reputation for ferocity despite small size, paralleling the teenager's underdog status against a superpower military force. DeGovia emphasized the importance of these local symbols in establishing what the characters lose. Number 14. Though set in the fictional town of Calumet, Colorado, the movie was filmed in and around Las Vegas, New Mexico. Colorado. Many buildings and structures which appear in the film, including a historic Fred Harvey Company hotel adjacent to the train depot, the train yard, and a building near downtown repainted with the name Calumet, Colorado, are still there today. An old Safeway grocery store was converted to a soundstage and used for several scenes. Memorial Middle School in Las Vegas served as the high school where Soviet paratroopers land in the opening sequence. The Fort Union Drive-In movie theater was used as the re-education camp where the boys find their father. Number 13. The young actors participated in weapons handling and survival instruction before filming began, working with military advisors to learn proper rifle techniques, tactical movement, and wilderness skills. This helped make their on-screen combat movements appear more authentic, with cast members learning to handle weapons safely and understand basic tactical principles. The training wasn't Hollywood choreography, but about learning real tactics that made their actions feel earned rather than rehearsed. The camaraderie forged during this period directly translated into the believable bond between the Wolverines on screen, much like the boot camp training in Platoon. Milius insisted on authenticity in the action sequences, believing audiences could distinguish between trained and untrained performers, an approach echoed in Black Hawk Down. Number 12. Patrick Swayze's portrayal of Jed Eckert positioned him as a serious leading man before Dirty Dancing, and Ghost transformed him into a romantic icon and major star. His performance anchors the film's emotional core, showing Jed's transformation from high school student to hardened resistance leader carrying the weight of command decisions. Swayze brought intensity, and vulnerability to scenes where Jed must execute a traitor or comfort his younger brother, demonstrating dramatic range beyond his previous work in The Outsiders. Milius recognized his natural leadership qualities during casting, noting his ability to command respect from other young actors. The role proved he could anchor a major studio film, leading directly to his casting in projects that made him a household name within just a few years. Number 11. The film featured early performances from Charlie Sheen, Jennifer Grey, Leah Thompson, and C. Thomas Howell, several of whom would become major stars within a few years. Sheen, playing Jed's younger brother Matt, was relatively unknown before later starring in Platoon and Wall Street. Grey appeared in Red Dawn before her breakthrough role in Dirty Dancing opposite Swayze 3 years later, though reports indicated they didn't get along well on either set. Thompson followed with Back to the Future and Some Kind of Wonderful, becoming one of the decade's most recognizable actresses. Howell had just starred in The Outsiders and used Red Dawn to establish himself as a serious young actor. Milius assembled the cast based on talent rather than star power. Number 10. Powers Booth plays Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Tanner, a downed U.S. Air Force pilot who briefly joins the Wolverines after they rescue him from a re-education camp. The scenes emphasize the occupation's psychological impact, with Tanner describing the broader war situation and explaining NATO's collapse and Soviet strategy. Booth brought gravitas to the role, having recently won an Emmy for Guyana Tragedy, The Story of Jim Jones, lending credibility to Tanner's military bearing and strategic knowledge. Milius wanted Robert Blake for the role, but was overruled by producer Frank Yablans. Booth later claimed certain cuts negated the emotional dimension of his character. His character serves as a bridge between the teenager's limited perspective and the wider conflict unfolding across America. Number 9. Despite controversy surrounding its violence and political themes, Red Dawn was the 20th highest grossing film of 1984, opening on August 10th, 1984 in 1,822 theaters and taking in $8,230,381 on its first weekend. It ultimately grossed $38,376,497 domestically against a production budget of $17 million, making it a significant financial success for MGM/UA. The film benefited from extensive marketing emphasizing patriotic themes and the novelty of the PG-13 rating, with original theatrical posters featuring American flags and young faces. It remained in the top positions for multiple consecutive weeks despite mixed critical response. The producer attributed the strong opening to teenagers eager for action films that acknowledged them as mature audiences. Box office tracking showed strong performance in rural and suburban markets. Number 8. Red Dawn received mixed reviews, earning a 48% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Metacritic assigned the film a score of 53 out of 100, indicating mixed or average reviews. Some critics labeled it right-wing propaganda designed to stoke Cold War fears, with political criticism dominating much of the negative response. New York Times reviewer reviewer Janet Maslin said Milius's Red Dawn is more rip-roaring than anything he has done before, delivering a rootin'-tootin' scenario for World War III. Other critics called it infantile right-wing fantasy and cynically provocative. The debate became part of the film's enduring legacy, with critics sharply divided along political lines about whether it glorified militarism or explored universal resistance themes that transcended ideology. Number 7. The film is often cited as one of the most distinctly Cold War-era American movies, capturing the nuclear anxiety and Soviet fear that defined the early 1980s when ICBMs, Star Wars Defense Initiative, and movies like War Games contributed to an overall climate of concern. The opening sequence with Soviet paratroopers descending over a US high school became an iconic image representing American vulnerability during renewed Cold War tensions. Milius incorporated specific references to NATO dissolution, Mexican political instability, and grain embargoes that directly echoed real policy concerns from Reagan administration briefings. Film scholars frequently cite Red Dawn when analyzing how popular culture processed Cold War fears, alongside Rambo and Top Gun as distinctly Reagan-era productions. The film's vision of occupation resonated with audiences who had grown up with civil defense drills. Number 6. The closing monument narration frames the Wolverines as fallen heroes rather than triumphant survivors, with most members of the original group dying during the winter of fighting. The story emphasizes sacrifice over triumph, deliberately avoiding the happy ending typical of 1980s action films in favor of somber reflection on the cost of resistance. The final dedication plaque scene reveals that Jed and Matt Eckert both died in battle, along with most of their companions, rendering their guerrilla campaign a Pyrrhic victory at best. Milius insisted on the tragic ending against studio pressure for something more uplifting, arguing that real resistance movements suffer devastating casualties. Screenwriter Kevin Reynolds supported the decision, noting that romanticizing teenage warfare would be morally irresponsible. The final images show a memorial park in a liberated America. Number 5. Wolverines has reportedly been used informally as a call sign and battle cry by US troops in later conflicts, particularly during the Iraq War when soldiers adopted the film's imagery as a symbol of resistance and American fighting spirit. Operation Red Dawn, the 2003 mission that captured Saddam Hussein, was reportedly named by military planners familiar with the film. Military culture websites and veteran forums frequently reference the film when discussing guerrilla tactics and small unit operations, though its tactical accuracy remains debated. Milius expressed surprise at the film's adoption by actual military personnel, having intended it primarily as allegorical entertainment rather than a tactical manual. During the Russian invasion of Ukraine, several Russian armored vehicles destroyed around Kiev appeared with the word Wolverine spray painted in white. Number 4. Milius had a reputation for forceful political and creative viewpoints, having written Apocalypse Now and Dirty Harry before directing films like Conan the Barbarian. His vision shaped Red Dawn's uncompromising tone, refusing studio suggestions to soften the violence or add romantic subplots that would dilute the survival story. He maintained significant creative control, protecting his vision while managing budget and schedule concerns. The unflinching school invasion sequence demonstrates his willingness to depict violence other directors might have suggested or softened, showing teachers and that students shot without cutting away. His political conservatism informed the film's themes, though he insisted the story was about resistance rather than ideology. His partnership with Alexander Haig to develop plausible invasion scenarios added authenticity that also fueled critical controversy. Number 3. Scholars and critics continue to analyze the film in the context of Reagan-era politics, examining how it reflects conservative fears about American weakness and Soviet aggression while simultaneously exploring universal themes of occupation and resistance. It remains referenced in discussions about media and nationalism, particularly regarding how popular culture processes geopolitical anxiety and shapes public attitudes toward military conflict. American flags prominently displayed throughout the film become complex symbols, representing both genuine patriotism and potential nationalism depending on viewer interpretation. Film studies courses frequently include Red Dawn when examining 1980s cinema and Cold War cultural production, alongside Rambo and Top Gun. Some scholars argue the film asks Americans, how would you like it if somebody did that to you, in reference to American interventions abroad, suggesting an anti-imperialist reading. Number 2. Unlike typical Cold War action films where heroes triumph decisively, Red Dawn portrays resistance as costly and ambiguous, with the Wolverines never achieving clear military victory before their deaths. The film explores how teenagers transform from frightened students to hardened fighters, showing both the necessity and the psychological toll of violence on young people thrust into war. MGM apologized to Alaska War veterans for the film's advertising, which claimed that no foreign troops had ever landed on US soil, overlooking the Aleutian Islands campaign of World War II. Leah Thompson said the original cut featured a love scene between her and Powers Booth that was cut after previews because of the age. Difference? Jennifer Grey stated an intimate scene between her character and Swayze was attempted but abandoned after a failed take. Number 1. More than its box office or cultural impact, Red Dawn is remembered for launching the PG-13 era that permanently changed how Hollywood classified violence in mainstream films. The MPAA rating card before the opening credits represents a watershed moment in American cinema, creating a new category that would dominate multiplexes for decades and fundamentally alter the economics of summer blockbusters. The PG-13 rating allowed studios to include more intense action and violence while still marketing to teenage audiences, making films like The Dark Knight, Jurassic Park, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe possible. MPAA Chairman Jack Valenti later acknowledged the rating's creation was one of his most significant contributions to the industry. Milius benefited from fortunate timing, as Red Dawn would likely have received an R rating under the previous system. Red Dawn remains a product of its time, a Cold War myth that launched future stars like Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen, while pioneering the PG-13 rating that changed Hollywood forever. Its influence on both military culture and film classification ensures its place in cinema history. Which hidden detail surprised you most, and what film should we open next?